So our next session will let us dive into the place layer cake. So if I invite Anne-Marie and Martin. So unfortunately, Alan from Sandwell, at the last minute, has been unable to join us. So Martin's done so well, right? He's coming back again. But actually, this is very appropriate because, to be fair, and I should give him the credit, he invented the term place layer cake, right? We've just nicked it.
Alan won't mind me saying he's got a little bit more hair than me. It's okay. It's seamless.
So what we're going to do is we'll first get a little bit of provocation from Anne-Marie, who is the Chief Exec of Torbay Council. She's been in the role for over 4 years. A solicitor by profession, Anne-Marie's been leading the transformation of the council and the place. In 2023, the council won Most Improved Council Award, which I know they were very proud of. She also championed the creation of the Torbay story, which has been used to gain over 110 million of levelling up funding and has also been very instrumental in attracting private sector investment. Anne-Marie, we would love to hear from you.
Morning, everybody. So for those of you that don't know Torbay, we are a glorious part of Devon. We are the English Riviera. We've got 23 miles of coastline, but we're small in geography, just 24 square miles. We're one of the smallest unitary authorities. Well, we're the 7th smallest, but we're absolutely striving to become perfectly formed, and our improvement in terms of Most Improved Council was certainly a step in that direction. We have an absolutely stunning natural environment, but we comprise of 3 very distinct and different towns sitting around our beautiful bay, and we're next door to the stunning Dartmoor National Park. However, for all of our beauty, we've got disturbing levels of deprivation. We are the most deprived local authority area in the southwest. We've got 1 in 4 of our children formerly living in poverty. For such a small area, they're not dreaming of going to university. Too many of our children haven't even been to the local beaches, which is a significant concern in terms of their aspiration for the future. Our average weekly earnings are way below the national average, and in common with many other coastal authorities, an absolute lack of investment in the place over the last 10 years. So therefore, an absolute imperative that we change the future for our residents and the future of our place. John's already told you, so I don't come from a place background. I'm a solicitor, a litigator at that, so no boos and hissing, please, in that regard. You know, I was in the child protection, adult safeguarding arena. So that complexity as local authorities that we deal with, I was absolutely dealing with some of the most complex and concerning issues that inhabit our places. So I couldn't have been further from placemaking in my career, but I became chief executive during the pandemic. Crazy thing to do, never become chief executive during a global pandemic. So as well as focusing on the absolute crisis of that, I knew intuitively, though, coming from the Bay, living and absolutely breathing, eating, sleeping, breathing the Bay, that we needed to focus on our place. But what we needed to do, I honestly had no clue. Within the first few weeks, obviously meeting virtually because we were in lockdown, I reached out to external partners to get their view of the Bay and where we were and what we needed to do. And they really helped me clarify that which we needed to take forward. I heard from them, and I knew to some degree, just the extent that we'd become insular as a place. We'd convinced ourselves that our smallness meant that we were insignificant and nobody would listen to us. And whilst we had individually good ideas, we weren't fitting those together in terms of the vision of the place. So within weeks of my appointment, I presented a paper to what we now call our Place Leadership Board. seeking their support in terms of bringing in thinking places to help tell our story in a different way and to create that really place-led approach. So where are we today? We have an absolute, high-level, high-functioning place leadership board with an independent chair who is passionate about the place. He's in the room, but I'd say that if he wasn't in the room. As much as I eat and sleep and breathe the place, Jim absolutely does it far more than I do. We've got our story that we are using every single day, whether it's driving into our car parks. We've got our place leadership branding, our place story branding as an everyday part of the Bay. But importantly, we've used it to tell our story very, very differently. So with government, John referenced the success that we've had in funding, whether that's Towns Fund, Future High Streets Fund, Levelling Up Round 3, what else have we got? Long-term plan for towns. We've got over 110 million of funding from central government, but landing it with partners. So we've got a very different relationship now with National Lottery Heritage Fund. We've been designated a heritage place, and improving relationships and support from Arts Council, from Homes England, really contributing to what I believe is a really once-in-a-generation opportunity that we've got for the Bay. We've appointed Wilmot Dixon and Milligan as our regeneration partner to help deliver some of that physical regeneration. But actually, we attended UK Reef earlier this year with them as a team to seek institutional investors, using the Torbay story as an integral part of what opportunities that there are in the Bay. With those institutional investors, we are seeking to translate that 100 million into £500 million worth of investment in the Bay. I told you before, we're only 24 square miles, so therefore the impact of that level of investment in the Bay is truly changing the future. We've got our towns board. So underneath our place leadership board, we've got varying levels of towns boards functioning, and we're pushing again at what that looks like. We've got our champions programme. I asked the team earlier to tell me, as of today, 2,606 of our businesses, our residents have signed up in terms of our champions programme. But we're taking the opportunity for a refresh to make sure that we're continuing to push as we move forward. Significantly, we know we need to land it differently for our residents. How we invoke their passion and pride in the place. How we give that inspiration and aspiration for our young people for the future. Devolution is on the agenda for us. Our statutory instrument is going to be laid next week. We come into being in terms of a Devon and Torbay devolution area in the new year. So we're about to embark on some work as to what a place-led approach looks like in a wider geography, recognising even more than the 3 towns that we've got in the Bay. How do we do that across geographic Devon? We've got the once-in-a-generation opportunity that the place story and our place-led approach has given us the ground level to build upon. It gave us a different confidence. Through our place leadership board, through our champions programme, we'll now absolutely be delivering upon that. So we absolutely do change the future for Torbay's residents. Thank you.
Now, Martin, without preparation, because you're standing in at the last minute, I'm sure you would have a bit to say about place layering and why it's important and etc. I know you've spoken about it many times.
But I think you've just heard from really important that last bit around devolution. Whatever the shape, structurally, administratively, of our country going forward, England and then the UK have devolved nations, here's the truth. You've got to, more importantly, amplify coherently your place, however you identify it, within whatever that additional bit of layer cake is. So when I talked about layer cake, it was the birthday, wasn't it? When you were 15? 10 years old. And talked about layer cakes. People worry because they go, oh, but what happens? We're going to get diffused out. We're going to get shouted out. We're not going to be able to amplify. This is the amazing thing. In my previous place, we would be able to say, do you know what? And we've got Rashid here and a couple of others that know the old city that I was in. There is something very proud about Coventry as a medieval city. there's something equally proud about understanding the relationship between Coventry, keep the layer cake going, and its relationship with the county of Warwickshire, because the two things are inextricably linked. There's not a problem with pride, although we weren't quite there at the initial stage of having Birmingham as the second biggest city in this country, right? 20 minutes away. Equally comfortable about London as our only global city, less than an hour away. Equally comfortable when you speak to Chinese investors, Asian investment, particularly Canadian investment. The scale of our places needs to amplify the Midlands engine, or whatever we called it, or the West Midlands, or the power of the Black Country. My point about all of that is, right down to what Steve reflects on as well, the hyper-local, all of these are bits of the layer cake. And it's not a problem, providing you understand actually at what point do you need, again I keep using the word, do you need to amplify the different place part in it. And actually that would be to different audiences, which is a classic marketing thing actually. But it's also about respecting the fact nothing is going to take away the provenance, the amazing nature of Anne-Marie's place and the Bay. And as it thinks about the Devon relationship and then the wider Southwest challenge of, with respect, connectivity and real challenges for Anne-Marie's places and Plymouth and other bits with just very poor rail connectivity for great places. That's cool. So how can they be over it together at MIPIM and UK Reef? Not just with great people like Wilmot Dixon and Regenerators, but actually other places going, we've got the same compelling story that we need to tell about how we connect our amazing places to each other. And I don't think, John, I've never thought that those two things are mutually exclusive. No one's going to turn around and go, I don't care about the Bay anymore. No, I just care deeply about the Bay and the relationship now with different partners as we now sell it. And I don't think it's easy sometimes, but that's why I talked about the place layer cake, because I think it's real. And I'm kind of a bit over this kind of ridiculous sense of you go to international expos, and we all do it, by the way, and we get into our little areas and hidden, because we're proud of our place. The power is when you reach out and speak to other places as well as an amalgam to then sell something which is even more powerful. But you give nothing of yourselves away in that. In fact, I would argue you gain more. That'd be my take. Unrehearsed.
It's one of the most interesting bits that when we work with places, their biggest issue, going back to what Anne-Marie mentioned, is insularity. And because they're generally coming from a political basis, where there is a red line, all the thinking is within that red line. They might have a university just outside the red line, but it's not part of the story. What? Right? We're back to fuzzy geography. The biggest challenge we have is to encourage places to think out, reach out, to strengthen within, So Anne-Marie, there's a question there. I look after the place brand of one of the most deprived areas in the UK. How is Torbay encouraging young people to remain in the place? Good one. Hard one.
A really hard one, because actually we need our young people to go and learn and get those experiences elsewhere, but we need them to come back, but we need the opportunities worthwhile to bring them back. And going back to the beauty of our place, how do we make it a place where there are those opportunities which are really different now after the pandemic in terms of our cultural offer, and therefore working with National Lottery Heritage Fund, working with the Arts Council to change the feel of our place, to make it a place where they can go to university, but they come back and they have those skills and we have those opportunities. Some of it's about raising the aspiration, giving them an inspiration, but it's working with our businesses and with our local college provider in terms of those opportunities within the Bay. But it's a focus that we have at our Place Leadership Board. How do we work together as businesses, as the anchor institutions, the public sector institutions, to provide those opportunities for our young people? And we are working away at it on a daily, weekly basis, but there is no silver bullet on it, I'm afraid.
True. Interesting one about Northern Powerhouse. When we talk to a lot of stakeholders around the country, the Northern Powerhouse is often talked about in quite glowing terms, and I think that's because it's known as a brand. But the question here, I'll give this to you, Martin. Is it a political white elephant, or could it still achieve something meaningful?
Well, what's really important about the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine, pick any other kind of testosterone-fueled kind of labels for stuff. I mean, what's there not to love about a powerhouse and an engine? It's like amazing. But actually, if you just think about it, they don't exist. Just think about that. They don't exist. They are made-up entities. So you've got to be, and the reason I start there is you've got to be really, really honest about whether they're white elephants or not is kind of not the point. They don't exist as places. They are a collection of a lot of places that do really have an identity. In layer cake terms, they are labelling that. So for me, I don't know whether they are or whether they're not. What I do know is the only way you're going to get the kind of equalisation in our places, the kind of investment, is not through that kind of labelling, whatever it is. It's about the coherence of the offer for the individual place. But going back to the previous bit, which I think is honestly more important than anything else of my ramblings, think about the power of when we're speaking together at, whether it be, let's say, expos, town centre events, retail events, just look at the power when the passion of our own place is then married up with those around us. In this case, it might be called part of the overall, powerhouse. I'm in a place now where there's been a pan-regional partnership put up, which was previously known as the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, is now the pan-regional partnership, which is about 4.5 million people. But just watch people's reaction when you stand in those pavilions and no one, I'm talking to Jim from Torbay and others, powerfully talking about their places, and no one could say anything else other than they're proud, they're obviously unequivocally of their place, but then sharing a platform with another place that maybe is just next to you geographically. You don't, again, dilute it. So whether it's powerhouse, engine, don't let's get overexcited about that. Watch what investors do. Watch what politicians do. Initially, they get a bit edgy about, oh my word, are we being edged out? Then they realise the power of coexisting and being able to talk about things that maybe are common, challenges and opportunities. And I just think we need to do more of it. And, fine, I'll shut up. I remember years ago, MIPIM, the big property expo, which is not everyone's cup of tea, for years and years, I mean, I'm embarrassed now looking back, for years and years, Coventry and Birmingham had two very, very separate, high-costing environments to project their individual places. The year when we decided to come together, okay, albeit under a West Midlands combined authority, you watched the kind of confidence, the kind of almost unshackling of people to go, yeah, actually, what an amazing asset that we've got on each other's boundaries. And I don't know, I think it's quite a human thing rather than anything else. And investors just want to know there's a coherence, there's one voice of a place or set of places.
If I could just add, so, Great Southwest. So we had our pan-regional partnership launched last year to add that layer on behalf of the Southwest. But it struggled. We're a year in, and it struggled to find its place in terms of how it supports the identity of the places and have that different messaging, that confidence. Interesting, obviously, as part of the budget, government launched consultation in terms of ceasing the funding in terms of pan-regional partnerships. And for those places that are well established, I can certainly see the value in those continuing and the constituent members recognising that. For the Great Southwest, I'm concerned that we won't be able to evidence the impact to such a degree. So how will we do that differently if pan-regional partnership funding is to end? Because it's an important part of the layer that we can't ignore, because actually investors want to have confidence in us as individual places, but they want to have confidence in the wider scale and region, that functional economic area.
That's so important. Who or what decides the amplification strategy for the different layers of the cake?
I don't know what Anne-Marie's view is on this. My rapid view on this is sometimes that, as we've just said, it's a congested space. It's often a contested space, which is my point earlier about leadership and about letting go. I don't think you need in your place an amplification strategy per se. I think you need a set of principles where if the right time to sell unashamedly a particular part of your layer cake is X, then everyone gets behind that. If other times actually it is Y, and I've already mentioned it, so as an economist I'll go there naturally, we're embarrassing ourselves to Canadian pension investments if we talk about a requirement for investment in a place that's got a 10,000 population. By the way, that place of 10,000 population is probably an amazing place. That's not my point. It's probably embarrassing to talk about scale of investment for infrastructure for our communities, even at 500,000 or 1 million. You can't. So that's the reality. So do we need to have a strategy? It's pretty obvious. You stand on a platform and amplify to that particular investor, government policy, according to what it is. But it requires trust. It requires collaboration. My point earlier on, the private sector, the public sector, which forms politicians, chief execs say, I'm chilled about it. Anne-Marie, you go and take the stage because it's more important you talk about the Southwest. And that's not a strategy. That's just believing that you can champion your place, but also be alongside other places that also can help you. And not just allow them on the stage, but give them a foot up onto it. Would be my view. So I don't think you need a strategy. You just need trust and guile and a bit of finesse about how you amplify at different times.
And a lot of time, people are not thinking about the audience. That should be driving who's talking. Because at the end of the day, just going back to that, it's about, so a town has got its own audience. It needs its own voice. But at times, you do need that combined authority area, that PRP area. If you're talking at MIPIM, as Martin says, there's no point, that's somewhere you wouldn't go. So we work with lots of places where they do come together, often like counties and etc. And we see examples like Staffordshire, where they happily all come together because for an inward investment event, Staffordshire is the message. But it's totally different if they put an event on in their town for local people. Different message, different audience. And I think that's the important bit with this. So, do we feel the devolution deal for the East Midlands will help smaller places or take the easier routes with larger places? And forgetting the East Midlands bit, I guess you could kind of answer that in any scenario, really. There's always the view, isn't there, that the big places win.
Anne-Marie, give me your view, because it'd be obvious for me to talk about the West Midlands and some of the stuff there.
So, as I said, devolution, our statutory instrument, is to be laid next week. So, if we look at the geography then, Devon and Torbay, I've already said, Torbay, population of 140,000. It's only Devon and Torbay in our Devo deal. Plymouth, part of the Devon geography, made their own political decision not to be a part of it. So, arguably, I've got small Torbay versus, big Devon with a population of 800,000. But it's about that leadership, how we're going in as equal partners in terms of the devolution deal. And more importantly, how we're operating within it. Equally important is then the districts that sit under the county and how they feel a part of it. So how we're working together with our district leaders, district chief executives, not in terms of the formal governance of the CCA, they won't be constituent members. They won't have those voting rights around the table. But how we work with them to ensure their voice is heard. And how we make sure that as a whole, in terms of that functional economic area, we are working together for those things that will impact the most for all of our places, rather than, and that may be, over the border from Torbay, it might be as far up as North Devon, a 2-hour drive. But actually, if we're amplifying the place, then that will benefit us in totality, rather than being parochial about it. We need to leave that behind as we go forward in terms of those wider geographies. Think of the bigger picture, and that's when we'll be successful. That's when we'll engage everyone, would be my take.
And so, I alluded to it earlier on. Look, we're 2.5 weeks away from, when they don't delay it, government coming out with a white paper, then moving fast towards devolution legislation. We don't know everything that's going to be in there. We can take some guesses, all of us. We might hear later on from Crater's colleagues and Darren and others about what Labour might be imagining. But let's just agree this one thing, that the UK map, and particularly the England map, will have a complete coverage of mayoral combined authorities, because that is the preferred model. Now, there's a question about the routes we should get there. Then the bit which has fixated me, why? Because professionally I spent a number of my years, whilst Chief Executive of Coventry, setting up the West Midlands Combined Authority and the first elected mayor for the West Midlands. And right from that point, as an economist who has never believed in trickle-down, ever believed that actually, whilst aggregation is really important, you bring lots of scale together, like housing market, travel to work, because actually that's the reality of how big economics works. But if you actually divorce that from the lives of people, which is my point earlier on, living actually hyper-locally in their place is just stuffed. So the trick here as we think about devolution completed in this country and proper devolution is going back to those old days of David Miliband and others talking about not just double but treble devolution. I believe as a massive devolutionist and localist, decisions made closest to the people that live in their lives, often greatly but sometimes not so greatly, is the trick. The trick is not to overstructure that. Because the kind of seduction, if you like, is to create big scale. Again, it's a bit testosterone, but big scale, big units of delivery, and then you get further away from the very people that we're talking about and we care about in places. But then the seduction is then to create loads of other mechanisms, right, which in themselves have loads of inbuilt prejudice, unintended but sometimes intended exclusivity, which then gets you further away. But you've got more bureaucracy, more costs and everything else. So I think we're facing, a really exciting opportunity to shout loud for our most local people, but also a reality check about how we do that at scale. Because the UK, and sorry, this is me speaking as an economist, the UK is struggling. In productivity terms, in global competitiveness, our places are struggling, not with each other. And by the way, we do pit each other against each other. That's a government issue of all colours. Levelling up pots of money for our places, town centres, task forces, competitively putting one market town up against another, one county up against another, one city in the same region up against another. Nonsense. It's got to stop. So we've got a reality here about how we deliver UK competitiveness. But the final bit I'll say about this, and Anne-Marie would have done this as well in her place, I have where I'm now. When you talk to investors that want to come in, yeah, of course they want to know about cost and are you going to be a great turnkey local authority? Are your partners great? But you know what? Never underestimate, even for global investors, the power of the hyper-local. What do I mean by that? They're very executives, they're shareholders wanting to know what the amenity is like, what the utility is like, what the great place is like, how much greenery there is, how vibrant and kind of functional are their town centres that they're going to be HQing in or they're going to bring in their supply chain in. You can have all these things at the same time, but not if you have the mindset of bureaucrats, which layers it up. You've got to let go and allow the unusual suspects really to flourish, would be my view.
There's an interesting bit there which you've just touched on about government funding and a competition. How do you stop places competing and strengthen collaboration to bring in private sector investment? It's one of our big frustrations that when we work in places, the conversation is almost totally about public sector funding and how do we get money out of government, how do we get money out of the combined authority, and hardly ever a discussion about how do we attract private sector investment. And it just absolutely astonishes us because it should be the other way around, So I don't know what your view is on that and how that fits with the whole notion, of collaboration. There was another question there about could you unify place boards across a region in terms of stronger advocacy, which kind of, again, sort of pitches into that whole private sector thing.
But it also pitches into the devolution deals. So how are place leadership boards then, and, as we're progressing in terms of the setup of our CCA, how, in terms of our investment board, our business advisory group that will sit under the CCA, how are those individual places coming together? And where we're sat right now, I don't know how we're going to achieve that in terms of the North Devon versus Torbay versus, East Devon. How are we going to manage, the innate competition that's been built in over decades in terms of that? It's going to be a real challenge, but we're going to need to push them to think differently, to recognise the power of the wider place, which is why, we're going to be working with Thinking Places in terms of that wider narrative for us as a devolution area, to give everybody that space and to give them the vision of the whole, which is led by our residents, which is led by our businesses. But it will be a challenge because of it's how we've been taught to operate as local authorities.
And I have to back on to what you said, Amrit. Honestly, there's a lot of things that wind me up. This notion of competitive pots and literally pitching in, and I would argue some of it is intentional, some is unintentional, our great places against each other within what is still, on a global scale, a relatively small geographical country is killing us. Just think, all of you, I know there's some project people and some economic development place people, and Anne-Marie have them, I'll have them. Just think about the aborted cost and opportunity cost of going for these bids after bids after bids, which are necessarily, because of the zero-sum game, will be unsuccessful. Much more debilitating than that, and Anne-Marie and I wouldn't do this, of course. I watch chief execs and senior officers, right, hide bids from each other. Even people that have actually, because of the nature of competition, even those who have been working collaboratively with each other for yonks, will hold the detail dearly to them because of the nature of competition. That is ridiculous. And I will stand on any platform and say shame on any of us that allow that to continue. Because this country's competitiveness, but social integration of fairness is too important to pitch great places together each other. And I will say this as well. The natural affiliations, naturally by devolution, are by geographical proximity. I get it. It's pretty obvious that you share particular geographies. Why don't we do this, though, in this country? Why don't we reach out across this country, for example, in areas of sectors that are shared from what could be 200 or 300 miles away, but the car industry declined in parts of the northeast, almost at the same time as it did, for example, parts of the West Midlands. Why can't we do collaborations openly and place-type activity that completely defies geography, but just we're shared by and bonded by its incredible provenance of particular industries of the past? But we don't tend to, because, again, the whole system is militated against that. Listen, everyone, we've got to shout loud about this because, it's not on, and it's really hurting our places, and it's hurting our natural collaboration as a country.
Brill. Right, well, I think we'll draw that one to a close. Can I thank Anne-Marie? Can I thank Martin for standing in? Again, there's a lot more questions, so ask at lunchtime.